The United States was sending more troops overseas, and my husband, my brave, loyal James, was summoned to serve. I was proud of him, yet terrified for him to go. Texas felt so far from Southeast Asia, and I couldn't fathom not seeing his face every morning or hearing his laughter at my silly jokes. The night before he left, we lay in bed tangled in each other's arms, both of us awake in the darkness, pretending we were sleeping so we wouldn't have to say goodbye. I remember how I rested my head on his chest to listen to his heartbeat, trying to memorize its steady rhythm. When dawn broke and the time came, I helped him into his uniform and boots. My hands trembled as I fixed his collar. He held my fingers to his lips and kissed them gently, trying to reassure me. "I'll be back before you know it," he whispered. I nodded, biting back tears. At the Greyhound bus station in town, I stood with my arms wrapped around myself as the engine rumbled to life. James placed his cap on my head playfully to make me smile, and then he grew serious. "Margaret," he said softly, "for that's my name, though everyone calls me Maggie. I love you. I'm going to come home to you, I promise. You just keep our home fires burning, okay?" His voice broke a little on the last words. I couldn't trust myself to speak without crying, so I answered with a fervent kiss and the bravest smile I could muster. I watched as he boarded the bus with the other young men, each of them peering out at tearful wives, sweethearts, and parents. James found my eyes through the smudged glass window and pressed his palm to it from inside. I raised my hand in return, aligning it with his through the glass, a gesture of love and longing that had to last for months, maybe years. The bus hissed and lurched away, and I stood there waving until it was just a cloud of dust on the horizon. It was the last time life felt normal for a very long while. The days that followed felt hollow. I returned from the station to an empty house that still carried James's scent on his pillow and his boots by the door. Every corner of our home reminded me he was gone. I kept the radio on low all day, just to hear another human voice in the house. At night, I sat by the phone, praying it would ring with news that he was safe. In those first weeks, I wrote to him every day, pouring my heart onto paper. I told him about the mundane things, how I burned the first batch of cookies I tried to bake without him teasing me, how our dog Rusty kept waiting by the gate for him to come home. I tried to be brave and cheerful in those letters, ending each one with, "I love you. Come back to me soon." But between the lines of tidy cursive, smudged where tears dropped, the truth of my loneliness seeped through. Mail from Vietnam was slow and sporadic. When James's first letter finally arrived, I practically tore the envelope in my haste. His words were a lifeline. He wrote about the heat and the monsoon rains, about how at night he would look at the same moon and think of me. He drew little hearts in the margins and joked that the army coffee was so bad he missed my kitchen brew more than anything. I pressed his letter to my face, inhaling the faint scent of him mixed with the jungle humidity that seemed to cling to the paper. I read those words over and over until the ink almost faded, finding comfort in the hope they carried. But as the months dragged on, the war news worsened. Casualty numbers climbed and familiar local boys' names appeared in the newspaper's list of the fallen. I lived in constant fear of a knock on the door with bad news. The strain of it all settled over me like a dark cloud. I was 22 years old, alone and terrified that I might become a widow before I even truly became a wife. To make ends meet and to keep myself busy, I took a job at the town library. Books became my solace in the long evenings. It was there, stacking returned books and helping patrons find novels, that I met William. He was a quiet man, a couple of years older than me, an aspiring school teacher who had been medically exempt from the draft due to a childhood bout of polio that left him with a slight limp. William had kind green eyes and a gentle way about him. He often stayed until closing, grading papers at a corner table or chatting with me as I reshelved books. At first, our conversations were nothing out of the ordinary, just two lonely souls talking about literature and the weather. He knew my husband was in Vietnam. Nearly everyone in town did. William would ask if I'd heard from James lately, and I'd show him the latest postcard or letter proudly. He never pried, but I sensed he understood the worry behind my polite smiles. His own life had its hardships. I learned that his fiancée had left him the year before, unwilling to marry a man who couldn't serve overseas. We were both a little broken in our own ways, both aching for companionship even if we didn't realize it. Summer turned to autumn, and the leaves in our town blazed red and gold. I remember one late October evening, the air crisp and smelling of chimney smoke, when I closed up the library for the night. Rain was drumming on the windows, a sudden storm blowing in. William was the only patron left, gathering his papers. When I opened the door, a gust of wind nearly tore it from my hand, and cold rain spattered us both. He offered to drive me home since I hadn't brought an umbrella. I hesitated. Riding in a car alone with a man who wasn't my husband felt improper. But the storm was fierce, and the streets were already flooding. Grateful and feeling it was the sensible thing, I accepted his kindness. In the car, we talked over the clatter of rain on the roof. I confessed how quiet the house felt without James, how I sometimes woke up reaching for him in the night. William admitted he dreaded going home to an empty apartment, how the silence of his own loneliness echoed around him. By the time we pulled up to my house, the rain had softened to a drizzle. I invited him in out of courtesy, insisting he wait out the last of the storm with a cup of coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, two lonely people warming our hands on coffee mugs. I remember a specific moment. A crack of thunder made me jump, and instinctively, William reached out to lay a comforting hand over mine. It was meant as a kind gesture, and I should have pulled away, but I didn't. His touch was the first warm, comforting contact I'd had in months. In that instant, all the grief and worry I had been holding in came rushing out. I started to cry, deep, wrenching sobs that I tried to stifle with my hand. I felt so ashamed for breaking down, but I couldn't stop. William moved his chair closer and wrapped me in a gentle hug. It was the sort of embrace a friend would give, meant only to console. I clung to him, sobbing into his shoulder, imagining for a foolish second that it was James holding me instead. I hadn't realized how starved I was for comfort, for the simple feeling of someone's arms around me. What happened next is something I have replayed in my mind 1,000 times, wishing I could rewrite that night. As I cried into William's shirt, he stroked my hair and murmured soothing words. I lifted my head, intending to apologize for my outburst, and found his face very close to mine. Our eyes met. His were full of kindness and an ache that mirrored my own. In a haze of loneliness and longing, I leaned forward and our lips met. The kiss was soft, hesitant at first, and then it deepened as months of pent-up longing and sorrow poured out of both of us. We both knew it was wrong, even in that moment. I remember whispering, "I can't. I'm married," even as I returned his desperate kisses with my own. I kept apologizing in broken whispers, saying, "I'm sorry. I just miss him so much." But the apologies didn't stop what followed. In the dim lamplight of that quiet kitchen, with rain tapping on the roof, I betrayed my husband. William and I sought solace in each other that night and crossed a line I swore I never would. Afterward, I lay awake in the early hours, staring at the ceiling in shock at what I'd done. William slept fitfully beside me for a short while, then awoke before dawn, guilt-stricken. He apologized over and over, his eyes full of tears as he hurriedly dressed. I remember him standing at the bedroom door, his silhouette outlined by the gray morning light. "Maggie, I'm so sorry," he said, voice cracking. "This was my fault. I shouldn't have—" "It was both of us," I interrupted, my voice hollow. I was sitting up, clutching the bedsheet to my chest, feeling numb and nauseated with shame. "We made a mistake." He nodded, wiping a tear from his cheek. Neither of us knew what to say to make it right. Finally, he whispered, "I know you love your husband. I pray he comes back safe. You don't owe me anything. I'll leave you be." And with that, William slipped out into the drizzling dawn, disappearing from my life as suddenly as he'd entered it. I never saw him again after that. He quit the library and moved to another state soon after. Perhaps it was his way of atoning, or maybe he simply couldn't face me or himself. I'll never truly know. The moment the door closed behind him, I fell to the floor and broke down completely. I wept until I had no tears left, a keening, gut-deep cry that echoed in the emptiness of the house. I felt like the worst person alive. In one night, I'd shattered the image of the faithful, loving wife I wanted to be. I had betrayed the man who was across an ocean, bleeding and fighting for our country. For me, the guilt was like a living thing inside my chest, clawing at me relentlessly. I crawled to the bathroom and was sick, my body heaving with the violence of my remorse. After a long while, I mustered the strength to shower, scrubbing my skin until it was red, as if I could wash away the sin. But no amount of soap and water could cleanse the stain of that betrayal from my soul. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror afterward, eyes swollen, face pale, and I hardly recognized the woman staring back. How could I have done this? How could I ever face James again? The shame was overwhelming. In the days and weeks that followed, I existed in a fog of self-reproach. By some cruel twist of fate, a letter from James arrived just 2 days later. I remember my hands shaking as I opened it, terrified of what his loving words would do to me. In the letter, he wrote that his unit had been in heavy combat, but he was okay. He said thoughts of me kept him going through the worst nights, that the idea of our future together was his beacon. He told me I was his angel, his faithful Maggie, and that he thanked God for me every day. Each line was like a knife twisting deeper into my heart. I broke down sobbing on the kitchen floor, clutching that letter to my chest, rocking back and forth as our dog, Rusty, whined and nudged me with concern. I felt I didn't deserve the love in those words. That was the day I made a vow, to myself and to God. I would never ever betray James again. I would bury this secret so deep that it would be as if it never happened. I would spend the rest of my life trying to be the wife he truly deserved, even if I knew, deep down, I wasn't worthy. I knelt right there on the linoleum, next to the kitchen chair James had built for our table, and I prayed. Through tears and clenched teeth, I begged for forgiveness, though I couldn't yet ask it of James. I begged God to forgive me and to bring my husband home safe. In that moment, I promised that if James came back to me, I would dedicate myself to his happiness, to our marriage, with unwavering loyalty and honesty in everything else I did. And I kept that promise, at least in action if not in truth. Months later, by some miracle, the war ended for James. In April 1972, he came home to me. I will never forget the sight of him stepping off that bus at the very same station where I'd said goodbye. He had a duffel bag over his shoulder and he looked a little thinner, a little older than the last time I'd seen him. I ran to him, throwing my arms around his neck as he dropped his bag and lifted me off the ground in a tight embrace. I was laughing and crying all at once, overcome with relief and joy. He was home. He was really home. In one piece. Alive. And mine again. James pulled back just enough to look at me, and in that crowded station full of reunions, he kissed me as if we were the only two people in the world. It felt like a scene from a movie where the soldier returns to his sweetheart. I giggled through my tears as he twirled me once in delight, but I also noticed the slight wince as he moved. He had a healing shrapnel wound on his left leg and a scar on his forearm. He brushed it off when I fussed, saying, "It's nothing, just a scratch." Yet in his eyes I glimpsed at a darkness, the kind of pain and loss you can't see on the surface. My heart swelled with love and sorrow for what he'd been through, and a voice in my mind whispered, "He suffered and stayed true while you—" I silenced that thought and held him close again. On the ride home, I chattered nervously about how I'd kept his truck running, how the tomato plants in the garden finally bore fruit. James listened with a contented smile, holding my hand the entire way, but I could tell he was observing me, taking in every detail as if to make sure this homecoming was real. War had changed him. He was quieter at night, and sometimes I would wake to find him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring into the dark. Occasionally, I'd hear him whispering prayers or the names of lost friends in his sleep. I had changed too. I was determined to be the perfect wife, his anchor and comfort, especially now. I cooked all his favorite meals, massaged his shoulders when nightmares left him tense, and welcomed him back into the rhythms of home. From the outside, we likely looked like a picture-perfect couple, rekindling their love after a long separation. And in many ways, we were. Our love was real and strong, and oh, how I cherished him. But in the back of my mind, the guilt festered like a wound that refused to heal. In those first weeks together, I almost summoned the courage to tell him the truth half a dozen times. The words would sit on the tip of my tongue whenever I'd see him wince from a war injury, or when he would comfort me after I woke from a nightmare. I felt I didn't deserve his tenderness. One autumn night, a few months after he returned, I remember sitting on the porch swing beside him, leaves rustling at our feet. I blurted out, "James, I have to tell you something." My voice was shaking so badly that he turned to look at me in concern. My heart pounded. This is it, I thought. Tell him. But when I opened my mouth, my courage faltered. Instead of the ugly truth, what tumbled out was a burst of tears and a half-truth about how I'd been so scared and lonely without him. James pulled me into his arms, thinking I was just overwhelmed by the memory of his absence, and I let him comfort me under false pretenses. I hated myself in that moment, both for what I had done and for my cowardice in not coming clean. Time, as it has a way of doing, kept moving. Life settled into its new normal. In 1973, I discovered I was pregnant with our first child, a daughter we named Linda. Holding that little girl in my arms at the hospital, watching James cradle her with tears of joy in his eyes, I felt both immense happiness and a stab of pain. Linda was conceived after James's return, a symbol of our love and fresh beginnings. Yet, I couldn't shake the thought, I don't deserve this perfect little family. 2 years later, we welcomed a son, David. With 2 children, jobs, and the bustle of everyday life, there was even less room for past mistakes to surface. But the secret lived within me, as vivid and poisonous as ever. I would lie awake at night, after James fell asleep, listening to his soft snoring, and I'd whisper into the darkness, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," as if my sleeping husband might hear my remorse in his dreams. Decades rolled by in what felt like the blink of an eye. Our children grew up and flew off to lives of their own. James eventually retired from the hardware store and spent his days tinkering in the shed or volunteering at the local VFW hall. I stayed active in the church and took up gardening. On the surface, we were that sweet old couple in the neighborhood that everyone admires, still holding hands on evening walks, still very much in love, and truly, we were in love. That is what made my lie all the more painful. How could I claim to love this man with every fiber of my being, and yet keep such a dark secret from him? Over the years, there were moments that nearly brought my secret to light. Once, in the late 90s, we attended the funeral of a dear friend who had died suddenly in a car accident. The shock of it shook me deeply. That night, confronted with how fragile life could be, I felt the words rising in my throat again. We were in bed, and I turned to James in the darkness. "I don't ever want to have any secrets or regrets between us," I began shakily. He took my hand, kissed it, and said, "We've had a good life, Maggie. No regrets worth dwelling on." His kindness in that moment nearly broke me. I swallowed my confession down yet again, and instead just cried quietly against his shoulder, neither of us fully understanding what I was crying for. Another time, I remember an evening when we watched a film about a marriage broken by infidelity. As the credits rolled, James shook his head and muttered, "I just don't understand how anyone could do that to someone they love." I felt heat rush to my face and a sick churn in my stomach. I got up to busy myself in the kitchen, hiding the tears that threatened to spill. That night, I was physically ill, just as I had been the morning after my night with William. James was so concerned he wanted to call the doctor, but I convinced him it was just something I ate. In truth, it was guilt and fear making me sick, fear that if he looked too closely, he might see the truth in my eyes. The older we grew, the more my guilt gnawed at me. It sat between us at every dinner table, even if James couldn't see it. In quiet moments, I would catch myself wondering if he had ever suspected something over the years. Had I been as good at hiding it as I thought? Sometimes I'd wake from a nightmare where he knew everything, where he was packing a suitcase, leaving me, or worse, where he simply looked at me with disgust and walked away without a word. I would wake up breathless, my pillow damp with tears, and roll over to cling to him, grateful it was just a dream. It was after our children were grown, after we'd both collected our pensions and even celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary, that I could no longer bear the weight of my secret. A few months ago, I had a health scare, a mild stroke that landed me in the hospital for a week. Lying in that sterile hospital bed, machines beeping softly and the night stretching silent and lonely, I had a lot of time to think. Faced with my mortality, I realized I might go to my grave with this secret still between us. And the thought of that filled me with a kind of dread I can't fully explain. I pictured James, after I was gone, going through my things and somehow discovering the truth, a forgotten letter, an old journal entry. Though I had destroyed any evidence long ago, the specifics didn't matter. What mattered was the undeniable truth. I had never given him the chance to truly know what happened, to forgive me or not forgive me. I had robbed him of that choice, and in doing so, I'd never really given us a chance to fully heal. I also thought about the example I'd set for our family. We raised Linda and David to be honest, to own up to their mistakes, to trust their loved ones with the truth. And here I was, having failed to do any of that with the person who mattered most. Perhaps it was the clarity that comes from facing death, or perhaps the stroke weakened not just my body but the walls I'd built around this secret. Either way, I knew what I had to do if I made it out of that hospital. I had to tell James. Even if it meant risking everything, he deserved the truth. We both did. When I returned home, James doted on me, helping me up and down the stairs, insisting I rest. I could see the fear in his eyes every time I winced or stumbled. He had almost lost me, and it shook him. Here was this man who had stood by me through everything, who would have mourned me with a clean conscience while I lay there with a stained one. The resolve to confess burned inside me, but still I hesitated, day after day. I would open my mouth to speak and the words would catch in my throat. Every time I looked at his kind face, the thought of wiping the warmth from his eyes was almost too much to bear. Finally, one crisp evening in early autumn, I found my moment. We had finished a simple supper, and James was in the living room, dozing in his armchair as the TV murmured softly with some old Western film. I was washing the dishes, my mind racing. I knew if I didn't do it now, I might never have the courage again. My hands were shaking so badly that a glass slipped and shattered in the sink. The sound startled me, and apparently it startled James too. I heard him turn off the TV and shuffle into the kitchen. "You all right?" he asked, concern in his voice, when he saw the broken glass and my pale face. I took a deep breath and nodded as I wiped my wet hands on a dish towel. "I'm fine," I said, though my voice trembled. "Just a bit clumsy tonight." He came over and gently took the towel from my hands, noticing that I was shaking. "Maggie, you're not fine," he said softly. "Come, sit with me." He guided me to the living room couch. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure he could hear it. Once we sat, he didn't let go of my hands. They were ice cold, despite the warm room, and he rubbed them as if to pass his warmth into me. I knew he could sense something was deeply wrong. My throat felt dry and tight. I cleared it softly, trying to steady myself. "What is it, Maggie?" he asked gently, searching my face. "You know you can tell me anything." Oh, the irony of those words. I felt tears already prickling at the corners of my eyes. I had rehearsed this confession so many times in my mind, but now, at the precipice, I was terrified. Still, I had to jump. "James," I began quietly, "I need to tell you the truth about something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." My voice quavered, despite my efforts to control it. I saw concern flash into confusion on his face. He squeezed my hands. "All right," he said cautiously. "Go on." I drew a shuddering breath. "Do you remember the year you were in Vietnam? How hard that year was for us?" My lips were trembling. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on me. "Of course. It was the hardest year of our lives. I remember every bit of it." His tone was wary now, as if he were bracing himself. I blinked back tears, but they escaped and rolled down my cheeks anyway. "While you were gone," I paused, my voice breaking. "While you were gone, I did something terrible." I could see his jaw tense, but he said nothing, waiting. I forced myself to continue, each word tasting like poison. "I was unfaithful to you, James." He froze, not even blinking. In the silence, I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel. He just stared at me, as if willing me to take back the words, or say it was a cruel joke. I let the admission hang in the air, my chest heaving as I tried not to sob. Finally, he managed to speak, though his voice was barely above a whisper. What do you mean?" he asked, even though he understood. Maybe a part of him just couldn't accept it without hearing it again. Tears were flowing freely down my face now. "I cheated on you," I whispered. "When you were away at war, it happened only once, but once was enough. I've lived with the guilt for over 50 years. I'm so sorry, James. You have to know that. I'm more sorry than I can ever say." He slowly pulled his hands away from mine, and I felt the cold absence where his warmth had been. He rose to his feet unsteadily, running a hand through his hair. I could see the confusion and hurt contorting his dear face. "With who?" he asked, the words coming out stiff and strained. "With a man from town," I said, my voice a trembling whisper. "His name was William. You barely knew him. He was kind to me when I was so lonely and convinced I might lose you. I made a terrible mistake, James. It was never because I didn't love you. I've always loved you." He turned halfway away from me, his hand gripping the back of the armchair for support. I wanted to reach for him, to beg for forgiveness right then, but I stopped myself. I didn't have the right to touch him in that moment. "All these years," he murmured, choking on the words. "All these years, and you never told me." I heard the betrayal in his tone, quiet as it was. I stood, legs shaking. "I wanted to. So many times I wanted to," I pleaded. I was a coward. I was afraid to lose you, to hurt you like I'm hurting you now. I thought if I tried hard enough to be a good wife, maybe I could spare you this pain and take it to my grave. But it was wrong. I know that. You deserve the truth, and I couldn't let myself leave this world without you knowing what happened. You deserve to hate me if you want. You deserve anything, James, except being lied to. He remained with his back partly to me, his head bowed. I saw his shoulders tremble. "Why now?" he asked, a little louder, anger creeping into the grief. "Why tell me after all this time? We had a life, a good life, I thought. Was it all..." His voice cracked. "Was it all a lie, Maggie?" My knees felt like they might buckle. "No," I said quickly, taking a step toward him. "No, our life wasn't a lie. Every day I loved you. Every day was real. It was just that one night, that one mistake. That was the lie. Everything else was truth. The family we built, the love we shared, that was all real. Please believe me." He finally turned to face me, and the pain on his face was unlike anything I'd ever seen. His eyes were filled with tears and confusion, and a hurt so deep. It took my breath away. "I can't talk about this," he said thickly, grabbing his coat from the sofa. "Not right now." My heart clenched in panic. He was leaving. "James, wait!" I gasped, following him as he headed for the door. "Please, don't go like this. Please." He paused at the doorway, one hand on the frame, not looking at me. "I just need to think," he said quietly. "I need to be alone." Then he walked out into the night. I watched, sobbing silently as he got into his truck and drove off down the road, red taillights disappearing into darkness. I closed the door and collapsed against it, a wail of anguish ripping out of me. That night, I truly thought it was over, that I had destroyed our marriage at the 11th hour of our lives. I spent the whole night on the living room couch, jumping at every sound of a car passing by, praying it was him returning. I must have drifted into a restless doze near morning, because the next thing I knew, I heard the door gently open. I sat up, heart in my throat. James stood there in the pale light of dawn, looking exhausted and carrying the weight of the night on his shoulders. We stared at each other across the room. My eyes were swollen, my hair disheveled from running my hands through it in despair. He looked so tired and sad, but he was here. He stepped inside and closed the door softly. I stood unsure whether to approach him. I felt utterly fragile. "Did you sleep at all?" I managed to ask, my voice raspy. He shook his head. "I drove around, ended up at the high school parking lot," he said, voice low. I sat there thinking, all night. My stomach twisted with guilt and fear. "James, He held up his hand as he slowly came closer. Let me speak first, please." I pressed my lips together and nodded, tears already sliding down my face. I braced myself for him to say he was leaving me, or that he could never forgive me. I had steeled myself to accept it, as much as it would break me. He took a deep breath. "I won't pretend to understand why, or maybe I do understand a little, I don't know." His voice was hoarse. "Last night, I felt like my whole world was shattered. I thought, how could she do this? How could she not tell me? I felt angry and hurt and so betrayed. Each word was like a dagger, but I nodded, swallowing back sobs. "I know," I whispered. "You have every right to feel that way." He ran a hand over his face. I thought about turning around and coming back home 12 times. But I couldn't. I just kept driving. Maggie, I even thought about what it would be like to just keep driving, and not come back. His voice broke on the last words. I covered my mouth to stifle a cry. The image of him leaving for good was more than I could bear. "But I did come back," he continued, his eyes meeting mine. "I came back because this is my home. You are my home." His face crumpled then, and tears filled his eyes. I gave it a lot of thought. We have a lifetime together, 55 years of marriage. We've raised children, held grandchildren, shared every joy and sorrow. I asked myself, do I throw all that away because of one mistake made half a century ago? I couldn't breathe. A tiny flicker of hope kindled inside me. "And I realized something," he said, stepping closer. "I realized that I have been happy with you, Maggie. Truly happy, almost every day of my life, since the moment I met you. That happiness was real. You are real. The girl I fell in love with, the woman who stood by me when I came back broken from the war, the mother of my children, the grandmother of our grandbabies, that's all real. So I have to believe that this," he faltered, "this awful thing that happened. It was a terrible mistake, yes, but it doesn't erase everything else." I broke into sobs, hardly able to stand. "It doesn't. I swear it doesn't," I cried. "I love you, James. I've only ever loved you." He reached out then and took me into his arms. I collapsed against him, both of us trembling. "How can you ever forgive me?" I managed to choke out between sobs. He held me tighter. "Because I love you," he whispered into my hair. "Because, after all is said and done, I would rather be with you, even with this pain, than without you." I felt his tears on my neck. "I won't pretend it's easy. It hurts like hell, Maggie. But I keep thinking of how many times we forgave each other for smaller things. How many times we chose love over pride." "I'm sorry," I wept, clutching him. "I'm so sorry for everything." "I know," he soothed, rubbing my back as I shook. "I know you are." We stood like that for a long time, holding each other as the morning sun slowly filled the room. It was as if every tear we shed washed away a bit of the bitterness and hurt. In the weeks that followed, we worked through the aftermath together. Some days were almost normal, quiet, gentle, full of the routine comfort of our life. Other days, one of us would suddenly break down, I with guilt, he with hurt. But each time we'd talk it out, or simply hold each other until the storm passed. He had questions now and then, and I answered them honestly, painful as it was. He wanted to be sure it had only been that one time, and I assured him with all my heart it was. He wanted to know why I hadn't told him when he returned, and I told him truthfully that I was scared to lose him and ashamed of myself. Those conversations were hard, seeing the flicker of pain on his face as we revisited that wound. But afterward, he would always hold my hand and say, "Thank you for telling me." It was as if relearning our history with this truth was something he had to do, and I owed him that openness. One night, about a month after my confession, we were sitting on the porch swing in the twilight. James cleared his throat and said, "There's something I should tell you too." I looked at him, curious and a bit anxious. He hesitated, then said, "While I was in Vietnam, there was a moment, just a moment, when I nearly stumbled too." I blinked in surprise. He went on, "It was after a really bad day. We lost some good men. I was in Saigon on leave and met a nurse at a bar. She was kind. We danced a little. I was so lonely and broken, and I missed you so much. I came close to seeking comfort where I shouldn't, but in the end, I couldn't. I couldn't do that to you." He sighed. "I never told you because, well, nothing happened, and I felt guilty just for thinking about it. But I guess I want you to know, I was not so different. I was human too. I put my hand on his. "Thank you for telling me," I said softly. "I don't blame you one bit. We were both so young and hurting." He managed a small smile. "I guess what I'm saying is, I'm not entirely without cracks myself." That moment was a turning point. It showed me that while my betrayal was a choice I made, the circumstances around it, the war, the fear, had placed us both in positions of vulnerability. We were both simply human, flawed, striving, loving human beings who had been through extraordinary pain. Not long after, I noticed that the nightmares that had plagued me for years, the ones where he found out and left, stopped coming. In their place were dreams of our youth, or of holding our grandchildren, or simple dreams of us sitting on that porch swing watching the fireflies. Peaceful dreams. Now, some months have passed. Autumn has given way to winter, and as I reflect on everything that happened, I feel a profound sense of peace. The secret that haunted me for so long is no more. James knows the truth, and miraculously he's still by my side. He forgave me. Sometimes I still can't quite believe I deserve it, but I accept it as a gift of love. We're not naive. We know time is short now. Neither of us would want to spend our last years in anger or bitterness. In the mornings, I wake up and see him reading the paper at the kitchen table, his glasses perched on his nose. And my heart swells with gratitude that I still have him, that he still wants me. He'll glance up and give me a gentle smile, and I know we've made it through something that could have broken us. This evening, as I finish writing these thoughts, the sky outside our window is a deep purple. James has just brought me a cup of chamomile tea, and he sits next to me. Our chairs close. Without a word, we reach out and hold hands. I turn to him and say,
"Thank you."
It's a loaded word, and he knows what I mean. He just nods and replies,
"I love you, Maggie."
In that simple exchange, there's a whole world of understanding. So here we are, an old couple with a lifetime behind us, a few years ahead, if we're lucky, and nothing left between us but love. The burdens have been laid down. We have weathered the storm and come out into calm waters together. If I could speak to my younger self, the frightened, guilt-ridden woman I was all those years, I would tell her, you will face the consequences of your actions one day, but you will also find that truth brings a liberation you never imagined. I would tell her that her husband is stronger and loves her more than she thinks, and that honesty, however painful, is kinder than a lie. As I finish my story, I feel James gently squeeze my hand. Night has fallen outside and the first stars shimmer above the Texas plains. We sit in contented silence, two souls who have found our way back to grace, and I whisper a silent prayer of thanks for this second chance, for the love that endured, and for the peace that finally fills my heart.